Is death the end of everything, or is it just the passage to an unknown dimension? From the earliest Mesopotamian civilizations, through the Egyptians, Greeks, South Americans, and Indians, up to the oldest civilization on Earth, men of all ages and all times have wondered what death is. And what does science think about death? Even here, there's no single belief uniting the scientific world. Instead, we see opposing views. But what are the foundations on which these views are based? Are there concrete elements that can allow us to investigate this unfathomable mystery? Actually, yes, and in this video, we will try to explain them through a historical and scientific investigation, where we will try to outline everything we know about death. In the video, we will hear stories of extraordinary experiences, but not only that. We will find what's behind telling extraordinary stories. Concrete elements and empirical data not only invite reflection, but also reveal new revolutionary scenarios. Well, before we set off on one of the most fascinating journeys to the limits of knowledge, if you haven't done so yet, we invite you to subscribe to the channel to support our work and not miss our new videos. So-called death is nothing more than an old affair in some new form and with a different outfit, because all things are changed, but nothing dies. And here and there, the spirit flies free from the body. According to the Book of the Dead, the ancient Egyptians believed that after death, the soul left the earth and began a journey into the underworld, where a final judgment awaited the deceased before they could enter the afterlife. The judgment was given by Osiris, who subjected the deceased to a long list of sins. The truth was judged by weighing the deceased's heart against a feather on a scale. But the ancient Egyptians weren't the only ones who believed the soul was immortal. In ancient India, people believed coming and going were illusions, since the soul neither comes nor goes. Plato and other Greek philosophers, perhaps influenced by Eastern culture, also claimed that the soul was immortal. But this wasn't an idea limited to Asia and the East. Most African tribes, the Aboriginal people in Australia, and the indigenous peoples in the Americas had the same belief. Julius Caesar, for example, wrote De Bello Gallico.
The Druids instill this as one of their fundamental dogmas, namely that souls never die, but after death pass from one body to another. And they believe that men, thanks to this dogma, are driven to the utmost courage because the fear of death has no reason to exist.
But where did this awareness of the soul's immortality come from? Was it just a way to ward off the fear of death? Many historians think that this is one of the main reasons, and that this belief was only the result of people's inability, on one hand, to understand the laws of the world. Conversely, it's a way to reduce fear of an event that was common in daily life in less advanced societies. But what if these weren't the only reasons? And what if instead we were underestimating or unable to see or understand a knowledge shared by these ancient cultures? Let's leave this question open and move to today, where Western societies show a sort of rejection towards the topic of death. The prevailing mindset is to ignore this event and live as if life never comes to an end, as long as this is possible. But how far has our understanding of death come? Are there specific elements to investigate? The first element we can analyze is to try to understand whether death is truly the end of everything, or if instead it is just a passage towards something unknown. The second element is to understand the true nature of consciousness and whether it is only the result of mechanical laws or if it is something else. Let's start with the first element. Clearly, we don't have testimonies of people who have died and then come back to life, but we have many testimonies of men, women, and children who have been declared dead. For several minutes, then they suddenly revived. If we can't really talk about actual death, these accounts, as we will see, have something very interesting and show extraordinary common elements that have been investigated over the years by numerous researchers. We're discussing near-death experiences. This is a fascinating and complex topic, and as we will see later, it's full of implications about what we think we are and what we think we know. To fully understand, let's start from the beginning and go step by step.
I was lying on the hospital bed. The ceiling light was blinding. Suddenly everything became dark and I felt myself being lifted as if I were floating. I could see my body below, lying still and motionless. I felt peaceful as a warm, intense light drew me in, accompanied by reassuring voices and a loving presence.
The first study we know of on the near-death experience dates back to 1892 and was conducted by the Swiss geologist Albert von Sankt. He described 30 cases that were personally reported to him. These include stories of mountaineers surviving near-fatal falls, stories of soldiers who had suffered life-threatening injuries during the war, and accounts from ordinary workers who had fallen from scaffolding or suffered serious accidents. Von Sankt concludes his study by stating that people who were near death or who had been considered dead, they reported not feeling any anguish and not experiencing any terror, but rather they had experienced calm, acceptance, and a sense of deep serenity. However, we have to wait until the 1970s to see the first studies published in specialized journals, studies that have continued more and more consistently up to the present day. Among the pioneers in this field of research, we find Dr. Raymond Moody, whose 1975 book, Life After Life, collected testimonies from people who had experienced near-death experiences, introducing the phenomenon to the public and becoming a global bestseller. Moody says many people who have had a near-death experience struggle to describe their experiences, as these sensations and perceptions are beyond the ordinary. One of the first sensations reported is a deep peace and absence of physical pain, accompanied by a feeling of well-being. Many describe feeling separated from their physical body, observing it from the outside, often from above. This state is followed by the sensation of moving quickly through a dark and narrow space, similar to a tunnel. In this experience, people often meet the deceased in a bright, comforting setting. A common element is the vision of a loving, welcoming, bright light. Some report experiencing a panoramic life review, seeing a rapid sequence of images and key moments from their past. Near-death experiences are often characterized by a strong sense of unconditional love and acceptance, emanating from the light or the entities encountered. At a certain point, people report finding themselves at a boundary or a point of no return, beyond which they can no longer return to earthly life. This is often accompanied by a decision or a feeling of having to return to one's body, despite the resistance to leaving the peaceful environment. Finally, many people, after this experience, report a profound change in their perception of life and all their values. They often develop an increased sense of spirituality and compassion, significantly influencing their way of living and seeing the world. Not all witnesses experience every element Moody mentioned, but these help identify near-death experience characteristics. It is also useful to point out that there is no correlation between the description of these experiences and the personal or religious beliefs of the individuals involved. No correlations have been found between social status or education level. These actually happen independently. A key area of investigation is when witnesses report out-of-body experiences, and they report in detail all the resuscitation maneuvers and events they underwent, which they could not have known about. These accounts are very important because they can be verified, and for this reason, researchers investigate them very carefully. Among out-of-body experience accounts, a key example is the one described by renowned cardiologist Pim van Lommel in his major work on near-death experiences. This led to the publication of Consciousness Beyond Life and features in several articles in the scientific journal Lancet. In this episode, Van Lommel shares a verified account from a coronary unit nurse.
During the night shift, the crew of an ambulance brings in a 44-year-old man in a coma, admitted to the coronary unit. He is being artificially ventilated with a bag and mask. Chest compressions are continued, and the patient is defibrillated. When I get ready to intubate the patient, I notice that he has dentures in his mouth. Before intubating him, I remove the upper denture and place it on the emergency cart. After about 90 minutes, the patient has an adequate heart rhythm and sufficient blood pressure and is transferred to the intensive care unit. After more than a week in a coma, the patient returns to the coronary unit and I meet him when I go by for dressings. As soon as he sees me, he says, "Oh yes, but do you know where my dentures are?" I'm left speechless. And then he says to me, "Yes. You were there when they brought me to the hospital. You took the dentures out of my mouth and put them on the cart. There were all those bottles on top and you put it in a sliding drawer." I was totally shocked because I remembered that this happened while the patient was in a deep coma and was being resuscitated. After further questions, I learned that the patient had seen himself lying in the bed and had watched from above as the nurses and doctors were resuscitating him.
Other very significant cases are the out-of-body experiences reported by witnesses with visual impairments or even those blind from birth who say they saw what was happening to them, like the witness Vicky, described in the book by Ring and Cooper. In 1973, 23-year-old Vicky, blind since birth, was thrown from a car during a road accident. A skull fracture and several serious injuries caused her to fall into an immediate coma. Despite being blind, the woman was able to see and recognize the car destroyed in the accident and describe it in detail. Later in the operating room, he was able not only to see his own body, but also to describe in detail everything that happened to him.
I had never seen anything, no lights, shadows, or anything else. Many people ask if I see black. No, I don't see black or anything at all. I remember I was in the hospital and it was scary because I'm not used to seeing things since I've never done it before. I recognized my wedding ring and my hair and I thought, that lying down over there is my body. Am I dead or what? Meanwhile, the doctors and nurses were rushing around my body and kept saying, "We can't bring her back."
But Vicky's story doesn't end there. She says she heard a sound like little bells, and then she flew above the hospital ceiling. She was then drawn toward a light. She suddenly felt transported to another world, welcomed by acquaintances who had died years before. And after talking with them, she was sent back into her body. The fact that a woman who was blind from birth and has the visual part of her cerebral cortex undeveloped can see people and what is around her. Clearly, it raises the question of how all this can be possible. But we will try to answer this question in the last part of the video. First, we need to clear up some of the most common objections. When it comes to near-death experiences, many claim that these are experiences recorded only in recent times because they are the result of our improved abilities in healthcare and the techniques and use of drugs during the hectic phases of resuscitation. But this isn't entirely true. What we now call near-death experiences have been recorded since ancient times, even if under different names, and we find traces of them in all cultures around the world. Plato recounts the story of Er, a soldier who revived 10 days after dying. And once he woke up, he said he had left his body and traveled to another world, where he saw souls being judged for their earthly sins. And what about the description found in the Tibetan tradition? Listening to these accounts, we can't help but think of modern reports of out-of-body experiences.
When the principle of knowledge leaves the body, does it say to itself, "Am I dead or am I not dead?" At this moment, the deceased sees that his body is being stripped of its clothes, his bed is being taken away, and he can hear the crying and lamenting of friends and relatives. But even though he can see and hear them, they cannot hear him. At that point, the sounds, the lights, and the rays, all three of these things are experienced.
Another objection to their authenticity is that these experiences may just be hallucinations or altered states, alterations of the brain due to the shock of trauma and the use of resuscitation drugs. However, studies conducted on witnesses of near-death experiences have proven that these occur during the period of clinical death of the individual, and not immediately before or immediately after a cardiac arrest. Pinpointing the exact moment is crucial because it confirms the near-death experience happened when all brain functions were absent, ruling out other explanations. So if we start from the assumption that consciousness is the product of the brain, at the moment when the brain ceases to show any sign of functionality, it is impossible for any signs of consciousness to occur. Research in humans and animals shows that during induced cardiac arrest, loss of activity in the cerebral cortex and brainstem leads to unconsciousness. Within just a few seconds, the first signs of oxygen deprivation in the brain are recorded just 6 seconds after a cardiac arrest. And if the heartbeat doesn't resume immediately, the loss of electrical activity in the cerebral cortex always results in a flat electroencephalogram, meaning no activity is present. The brain can be compared to an unplugged computer. All its circuits are disabled, and until it is powered again, it is not able to perform any operation. However, a brain without power for several minutes suffers severe damage. During cardiac arrest, doctors focus on resuscitation, so an electroencephalogram isn't performed. Not to mention that many times this doesn't happen in a hospital, but in the most desperate places. But there are exceptions, though. There are documented cases where a patient in cardiac arrest has their brain function analyzed at the same time. For example, this occurs during some neurosurgical procedures. So if during this kind of procedure, the patient experiences a near-death experience, it's possible to get a very detailed picture of their brain function. The most famous case in which this happened is that of Pamela Reynolds, a case that caused much debate, which we will now examine closely. Pamela, a 35-year-old woman, underwent a scan that revealed a giant aneurysm in one of the brain arteries near the brainstem. An aneurysm is like a balloon in a weakened spot of a blood vessel. If this bursts, and the risk is very real, it causes a brain hemorrhage that leads to death. The chances of survival for Pamela were very low. A surgery to fix the problem was very complicated and risky. Neurosurgeon Robert Spetzler from the Barrow Neurological Institute in Phoenix decided to take the risk and operate on her anyway. What happened during the operation was meticulously recorded. Pamela's body temperature is lowered to 10 degrees, and she is connected to a heart-lung machine. Due to the loss of cardiac activity, which always occurs during cases of hypothermia, hypothermia is induced in order to preserve brain cells. This is because during the operation, in order to operate on the aneurysm, all the blood present in her head will be removed. The electrical activity of the brainstem and cerebral cortex is monitored during all phases of the operation. The operation takes about 6 hours and succeeds. Upon waking, Pamela astonishes the medical staff by recounting one of the most profound near-death experiences recorded. Here are her incredible words.
I don't remember the operating room. I don't remember Dr. Spetzler. I was with one of his assistants. After that, nothing. Until the sound was unpleasant. It felt like being in a dentist's office. I remember the top of my head was tingling, and somehow I popped out from the top of my head. The farther I moved away from my body, the clearer the image became. I remember seeing many things in the operating room. When I looked down, I was very present. I thought it was strange how they had shaved my head. I expected them to shave all my hair, but they hadn't. I was metaphorically sitting on Dr. Spetzler's shoulder. I remember the instrument in his hand. It looked like the handle of my toothbrush. I also clearly remember a female voice saying, "We have a problem. Her arteries are too small." And then a man's voice saying, "Try from the other side." I felt a presence. Somehow I turned to see it, and there I saw a tiny little point of light, like a pinprick. The light began to pull me, but not against my will. I had the physical sensation of going up. It felt like riding a very fast elevator. I realized that I was beginning to make out various figures. I saw many people I knew and others I didn't know, but I knew that somehow I was connected to them. Everyone I saw appeared as a person can look at the best moment of their life. You see my Uncle Jane. I was very close to him because he had taught me so many things. They didn't allow me to go any further, and they told me that if I continued toward the light, something would happen to me physically, and they would no longer be able to bring me back into my body. I wanted to go into the light, but I also wanted to go back because I had children to raise. I asked if the light was God, and they answered me, "No, God is not the light. The light is what happens when God breathes." I remember thinking, I'm in the breath of God. It was my uncle who brought me back, but when I got to where my body was and I looked at that thing, I definitely didn't want to go back, because it seemed very much like what it was, lifeless. My uncle started arguing with me. He told me, "It's like diving in. Just jump." He pushed me and I saw my body leap forward and I felt the cold inside me. I was back in my body. It was painful.
Everything that Pamela says she saw perfectly matches what happened that day in the operating room. These are the words of Dr. Spetzler.
Pamela was declared brain dead during arrest after 3 clinical tests. The electroencephalogram was silent, her brainstem responses were absent, and there was no blood flow in her brain. I don't believe that the observations she made were based on what she might have seen when entering the operating room. The instruments were not visible to her. I have no explanation for this. I don't know how it's possible that it happened, considering the physiological state she was in. At the same time, I've seen many things happen that I can't explain, and I don't want to be so arrogant as to say there's no way they could happen.
After hearing this incredible testimony, we can't help but wonder how all of this could have happened during a period of clinical death. Should we perhaps think that consciousness is something not strictly connected to the brain? And what does science say about this? To answer these questions, we must take a complex journey which will simplify as much as possible. But it opens up a new revolutionary vision of everything we thought we knew until now. What people normally think is that our brain, through its mechanical functions, gives rise to our consciousness. For example, we've measured how there is a 30% increase in blood flow to the brain when we think or pay attention to something. This occurs because neurons expend more energy for brain processes. Having observed this, we might be led to believe that it is therefore certain and proven that our consciousness is the result of brain activity. But in reality, despite what we still observe today, we have no direct evidence proving that neurons produce our consciousness. Let's try to explain this concept better. For decades, scientists have tried to locate memories and consciousness in the brain. The initial assumption was that activity in specific neural areas would always give rise to the same thoughts and emotions, but this research has never had positive results. Today we know that there is a correlation between the activity recorded in the brain and the experience of consciousness, and that this can activate many brain centers. But a connection doesn't say anything about what the cause is. Brain activity seems more like a way of encoding information. Let's think about a radio. We can search for radio stations by turning the knob that adjusts the frequency reception. but doing this doesn't influence the content of the radio broadcast. From this perspective, the activation of a specific part of the brain doesn't explain the contents of thoughts and emotions. What we can measure is only the correlation between the activities recorded in the brain and conscious experiences. Philosopher and neuroscientist Alva Noe writes this in a recent book.
The idea that we are our brain is not something that scientists have studied. It's rather a preconception. That consciousness arises in the brain is something that is never questioned. It's an indisputable starting assumption. But today we have every reason to reject this prejudice.
An event that sparked much debate in the scientific world is the one reported in an article published in the prestigious scientific journal Science, with the provocative title, "Is Your Brain Really Necessary?" And it reports a truly unusual case: the brain scan of a young mathematics graduate with an intelligence quotient of 126, which is above average. It revealed that 95% of his skull was filled with cerebrospinal fluid, and his cerebral cortex was only 2 millimeters thick. The remaining brain weight was estimated at 100 grams, compared to the 1,500 grams of a normal brain. And yet, despite everything, his brain functions were not impaired, and this leads to an inevitable reflection. Where were all the information and short and long-term memories, all the emotions and thoughts of this boy physically stored? If his brain mass was found to be very small, is it possible that the answer is only related to the brain's plasticity? That is, its ability to cope with and adapt to structural changes and thus develop more efficient connections? Or should we instead imagine that memory and thoughts are not physically located in the brain mass, but that they have another location? Before answering these questions, let's revisit near-death experiences. Among the experiences reported by witnesses, there is the one of reliving their own life, literally seeing it flash before their eyes. But not only that, many claim to have felt like they were in a place outside of time and space.
It was enough to think of a place or a specific event from your life to instantly find yourself living that moment in that specific place.
In addition to this, witnesses report that they strongly felt that everything seemed to be connected to everything else, in a tight interconnection. In those moments, the mind seems to hold all knowledge in a timeless, spaceless dimension.
In that moment, I understood why I was there, the reason for my illness, and in general, what life is. I understood that we were all part of something unique. It was all so obvious. The clarity and understanding I had in that state are simply indescribable.
If we relate these elements to our current scientific knowledge, and specifically in the ability to be in a certain place instantly and in the perception of an intrinsic connection with everything, what comes to mind? It's clear that one can't help but think of quantum physics and its revolutionary concepts. For example, quantum entanglement describes how two particles can remain connected in such a way that a change in the state of one instantly affects the other. Regardless of the distance, this phenomenon might remind us of the experience of being in a place instantly, simply by thinking about it. The zero-point field theory also proposes a universal energy filling all space and time. It suggests an intrinsic connection among all things, like the universal connection described in near-death experiences. These parallels prompt us to reconsider traditional views on consciousness and reality, suggesting that we may be only at the beginning of truly understanding the nature of our existence and our mind. Now let's imagine that the brain is like a television. The television is the device that receives signals and transforms them into images and sounds, allowing us to watch and listen to television programs. However, the content we see on the screen is not produced inside the television itself. Instead, it is transmitted by an external television station through electromagnetic waves. In the same way, we could consider the brain as a receiver or a decoder of consciousness signals rather than the producer of consciousness. In this view, consciousness and information do not physically reside in the brain, just as television programs are not physically inside the television. The brain, like the television, interprets and decodes these signals, allowing us to experience thoughts, memories, and perceptions. Now imagine that your consciousness, normally tuned to the channel of the here and now through the brain, temporarily disconnects from this physical state. During a near-death experience, it's as if the television is turned off or disconnected from its normal power source, allowing consciousness to tune into a different channel or state of existence. In this state, consciousness is no longer limited by the body and brain, but is free to explore other dimensions of reality. Those who have had a near-death experience often describe the sensation of leaving their own body, of moving through a tunnel toward a bright light and feeling connected to a greater universal energy. This passage seems temporary, as many return to their physical form with vivid memories of what they experienced. This suggests that consciousness can exist independently of the physical body, operating on a different level, similar to how a television might tune into a new signal or channel. If we look at our physiology, we also know that our cells and neurons are constantly regenerating. Cellular regeneration is well documented. For example, skin cells renew themselves every 2 weeks, while liver cells regenerate about every 6 months. Even the neurons in the brain undergo changes, despite the myth that neurons remain static throughout life. Neurogenesis, the formation of new neurons, mainly occurs in the hippocampus, a region associated with memory. This raises a fundamental problem. If neurons regenerate and change, where exactly do our thoughts, memories, and emotions reside? How can they be stored in structures that are constantly changing? Simply put, we can say that today it is believed that during regeneration, brain structures are rewritten and in some ways updated. This would be the reason why we wouldn't lose the information recorded in them. But memory, thoughts, and emotions might exist in the electromagnetic field observed during brain activity rather than in neural connections. The brain, therefore, would not be the generator of our consciousness, but rather a tool we use to perceive it. Going back to near-death experiences, is it possible then that when our brain shuts down, our consciousness tunes into a different frequency? Thousands of witnesses worldwide report this experience. One of the key theories of Van Lommel is the concept of non-local consciousness. He proposes that consciousness is not confined to the brain, but is a fundamental aspect of the universe, similar to quantum phenomena. The brain acts as an interface or receiver for non-local consciousness, not its source. This idea aligns with the discoveries of quantum physics, suggesting that consciousness may operate beyond the conventional limits of time and space.
People experience unconsciousness in a dimension where time and space no longer play a role. All is present. The past, present, and future exist within this dimension of consciousness. The dimension is unconditional love and wisdom. In this dimension, there is only the subject and everything is instantly connected.
What is puzzling in some ways is that if Van Lommel's studies, and not only his, are correct, they are simply confirming ancient beliefs that mankind has always held. We mentioned ancient texts at the start of the video, but many myths also describe the transition from life to death.
Listen, when the breath ceases, the vital force will sink into the nerve center of wisdom, and the one who knows will experience the clear light of the natural state. In that moment, do not be afraid of that clear, bright, dazzling yellow light, but know that it is wisdom.
What if the answer to humanity's greatest riddle were revealed? From an ancient tradition of unknown origin, yet always present before us in various forms. Clearly, we don't have a definitive answer to this question, but as we've seen in this video, there are many clues that deserve to be investigated and explored further. At this point, we're really curious to know your opinion or your experiences regarding the topic we've discussed today. Write in the comments what you think. And if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to support our work. See you in the next story.